Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
I arrived 3 days before the wedding. Not because I was needed, no one asked me to help, but because I wanted to see the house one last time. The house my grandparents built in 1961. The house my mother sold 6 months ago, behind my back, while telling everyone I had walked away from the family. She sold it for less than it was worth, to my cousin Dylan, of all people. And when I found out, it wasn't from her. It was from the county property records. That's how I learned I'd been erased. They thought I wouldn't come, that I'd stay away, like I always do. But this wedding, it's not just a wedding. It's the last chance they'll ever have to see me. None of them know that yet, but they will. The house was only 15 minutes from the event venue. Dylan had already remodeled it, ripped out the garden, flattened the porch, painted it some sterile white like all those HGTV people do when they inherit something they never earned. I stood across the street in a rental car, just watching, wondering if he even knew Grandma's rose bush had been planted over her ashes. Probably not. Probably didn't care. I thought about knocking, just once. No note, no words. Just let him open the door and see me standing there like a ghost. But I didn't. I still had a part to play. The rehearsal dinner was at a private club overlooking the lake. Expensive, flashy, exactly the kind of place my sister Rachel always dreamed of. She's the bride. Again. Second marriage. Third ring. She'll be walking down the aisle in a $12,000 Vera Wang dress, partially paid for by the trust fund that was supposed to be split between the three of us. The fund Grandma created. The one I was ridden out of after I moved to California for grad school and didn't come home for Easter 3 years in a row. They said I abandoned the family. No one asked if I could afford the ticket. No one asked if I was okay. I walked into that dinner like a bomb someone forgot to disarm. The moment my heels clicked against the floor, they saw me. My mother froze mid-sentence. Rachel stared like she was calculating risk. My father, the only one who ever used to defend me, looked down at his glass and said nothing. "Oh," my mother finally said, rising to greet me. "You came after all." I kissed her cheek like I didn't want to bite it. Rachel hugged me tightly, all teeth and tension. "We weren't sure you'd show. You've made yourself hard to reach." "Funny," I replied. "That's what I said about you when you drained the family trust without telling me." Her smile didn't break, but her grip on my arms did. A crack in the foundation, a flicker of the truth behind all that curated charm. Dinner was unbearable. I sat between my cousin Dylan, the new homeowner, and Rachel's fiancé Greg, a hedge fund baby with a jawline like a cartoon and opinions on everything. They laughed about early retirements and wealth stacking, while I picked at overpriced scallops and pretended not to hear when Dylan joked about how cheap he got the old place. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I let my silence harden. I let it grow teeth. When dessert was served, my mother clinked her glass. "I just want to take a moment," she said, "to thank everyone who stood by Rachel through the ups and downs. Family is about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Everyone raised their glasses. I didn't. Greg looked at me. "Everything okay?" I turned to face them. "Actually, no," I said calmly. "Since we're all about honesty tonight, I figured now's as good a time as any to mention that the family house was illegally transferred without my signature, that the trust was emptied through a quiet vote I wasn't informed of, and that the last time I heard from my own sister was when she texted me a Venmo request for her bachelorette weekend." Dead silence. You could hear forks being set down. I stood, slow and deliberate. But congratulations, Rachel. I hope this marriage lasts longer than the inheritance you stole. Then I walked out, not from the room, from all of it. From the family that treated me like a loose end they didn't know how to tie, from the people who smiled through betrayal and called it tradition, from the woman who sold her mother's house while claiming to protect her legacy. I'm not staying for the ceremony. They don't know this, but I've already bought property in another name. I've closed accounts. I've packed everything that matters, and I've sent one last letter to the family lawyer. They'll open it Monday morning. They'll learn I was never removed from the trust, and that every decision they made in secret is about to be undone. I didn't go back to the motel that night. I drove to the edge of town and parked outside the gas station where my father used to take us for slushies after church. I stared at the neon flickering in the window, the one that had been there since the 90s, still spelling out open like it was clinging to relevance. That gas station had survived 3 owners, 2 robberies, and 1 tornado. Meanwhile, my family couldn't survive the fact that I got a scholarship and left town. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. My mind had been sharpening itself for months, calculating every legal gap, every financial record, every missed phone call that could later be used as proof. I wasn't just walking away, I was dismantling a lie, brick by brick. And they were too arrogant to realize it was already happening. When morning came, I drove to the lake. Not the one by the resort. No, that one was too artificial, too filtered, too Rachel. I went to the real lake, the one where Grandma used to take me when we needed to get out of the house. I hadn't been there in years, but the dock was still there. So was the old boat, half sunken and rotting with moss. And for a second, just a breath, I didn't feel angry. I just felt gone. They had taken so much from me: the house, the trust, the right to tell my own story. But they never touched this place. They didn't even remember it existed. I opened my phone. The messages were pouring in. Rachel, what the hell was that? You embarrassed everyone. Mom, you've always been ungrateful. I should never have let you come. Dylan, you need to calm down before you get sued. It made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because they still believed I had no power. They had no idea that Grandma had quietly named me as contingent trustee in the second draft of her will. That's why I still had legal access. That's why the vote to dissolve the fund was invalid. And they didn't know about the file. I had been building it for almost 2 years. Every discrepancy, every tax trick Dylan used after flipping Grandma's house, every payment Rachel sent to herself labeled wedding planning from what was supposed to be a joint inheritance. Every time my mother told the lawyer I was estranged while emailing me photos of the family Christmas tree, all of it. Screenshotted, backed up, dated, and notarized. This wasn't a tantrum. This was an audit. I left the lake around noon and drove into town. I stopped by the law office, Mr. Keating's place. He was Grandma's attorney for decades. He still remembered me, still called me the smart one. I handed in the envelope personally. Inside, a signed statement, a demand to freeze all financial movement from the family trust, and evidence of misuse. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "You're serious about this?" he asked gently. I looked him in the eye. They made me this serious. From there, I headed to the courthouse, filed a petition to contest the house transfer, because my name was still on the deed, at least partially. That's what they didn't know when they sold it to Dylan. It wasn't theirs to sell outright. And if they wanted to fight me, good. Let them try. I had the paper trail. They had assumptions. By evening, I was back at the motel, eating cold pizza from a cardboard box and watching the sun disappear behind the curtains like it couldn't stand to look at this count any longer. Then the phone rang. Not my cell, the motel landline. No one had that number. I answered, "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. "Anna?" I froze. "Dad?" "I heard what happened at the dinner." I said nothing. "I'm not calling to scold you. I just wanted you to know I never signed the trust vote. They forged my name. I only found out yesterday." Something in me shifted. "And you're telling me this? Why?" "Because I was wrong too. I let them push you out. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would calm things down. But they didn't want calm. They wanted you gone. And you let them?" "I did," he whispered. "But I'm ready to fix it, if you'll let me." I didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, someone in that family admitted the truth. It didn't change what I had to do, but it shook something loose in me. We talked for another 5 minutes. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. Things he confirmed. Details he never questioned before. And when he hung up, I sat there staring at the receiver, wondering how different things might have been if he had called me 5 years earlier. But he didn't. So now it's too late. Tomorrow is the wedding. I won't be there, but they'll feel my presence anyway, because the papers have been served, the assets frozen, the damage contained. And by Monday morning, they'll understand that this trip wasn't a breakdown. It was an exit strategy. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of cloudless sky people pray for in July. Warm, still, mocking. I sat at the edge of the bed in that peeling motel room, listening to the slow hum of the wall AC and the occasional car passing on the highway. Somewhere across town, Rachel was getting her makeup done. My mother was barking orders at the caterer. Greg was probably taking a Valium and pretending he wasn't already bored of being married. And me? I was folding the last shirt into a suitcase I wouldn't unpack for a very long time. The letters were already in the mail. 5 of them, each addressed, each sealed in soft cream envelopes with no return name, just a blank sender line that told them everything. I had nothing more to say. Rachel's letter was the longest. It started with, "You always wanted more, even when you already had everything, so you took what didn't belong to you." It detailed how she manipulated Grandma during her final months, slowly isolating her, whispering doubts about me, convincing her I didn't care. She thought I didn't know, but I had the messages. Grandma had sent them to me privately before she passed, worried but unsure what to do. Rachel had made her rewrite the will in her favor, then destroyed the original draft in the kitchen fireplace. I'd always suspected it. Now I had proof. Mom's letter was different. Short, cold, precise. "You taught me how to disappear, Mom. I just finally did it better than you." I reminded her how many times she chose image over reality, how many times she defended Rachel's lies but questioned my truths, how she let me move out at 19 with no safety net and called it independence, while Rachel lived in the guest house till she was 28 and still complained about the coffee. My brother Thomas didn't get a letter. He'd made his position clear years ago when he called me a drain after I couldn't afford to split a vacation house. The man who once held my hand when I broke my arm now spoke to me only in Instagram likes and LinkedIn comments. He didn't deserve paper. But my father? His letter was real, personal, maybe the only one written without malice. I told him I didn't know whether I forgave him. I only knew that silence wasn't always neutral. Sometimes it's the knife you never see coming. At 10 a.m., I checked out of the motel and dropped the key on the counter without speaking. The clerk nodded at me with the expression of someone who'd seen too many people trying to disappear and knew better than to ask why. I drove south, past the wedding venue, past the reception hall, past the white folding chairs lined up on perfect green lawns that had no idea they'd soon be drenched in wine and entitlement. The email started coming just after noon. "Mr. Keating, received your filings. Will be contacting all parties by Tuesday. Rachel." "What did you do? Greg is furious." Mom, you are mentally unstable. You need help. Dylan, you've made a serious mistake. My lawyer will be in touch. Dad, they're scrambling, and now they know. I hope you're okay. Oh, I was okay. Better than I'd been in years, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for a seat at their table. I was burning the whole thing down. They thought I could write me out quietly, steal what was mine while posting family photos and hollow captions. But they forgot something. I had nothing left to lose, and people with nothing left to lose don't play fair. They don't ask twice. They don't apologize for keeping receipts. I stopped at a diner an hour outside the city and ordered pancakes I didn't really want. I watched the families around me, real ones maybe, or maybe just better actors. But none of them looked like they were pretending not to hate each other. None of them looked like they were waiting for someone to snap. That's what it had been like growing up in our house. A performance, an illusion of loyalty wrapped around competition, backhanded compliments, and quiet cruelty. You couldn't speak about what hurt you. It was ungrateful. You couldn't ask for fairness. It was selfish. You couldn't leave because family sticks together, even when it's rotting from the inside out. That day, Rachel walked down the aisle and married Greg. I know because someone tagged her in a story and curiosity made me look. She looked radiant, cold, composed, the kind of beauty that only works when no one knows what you did to get there. And in the background, seated in the front row, my mother dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, already preparing for her close-up. None of them knew that the photo would outlive the wedding. Because by Monday, the family trust was frozen. The house was under review. The emails from the estate's accountant started hitting inboxes. The revoked signatures, the misfiled documents, the suspicious withdrawals. Rachel's reign wasn't as clean as she thought. Greg's family noticed. Questions were asked. Lawyers were looped in. And for the first time in their lives, the people who had silenced me began to feel the pressure of a voice they could no longer ignore. That voice was mine, and I wasn't coming back. By Tuesday morning, the first domino fell. The law firm in charge of the estate sent out a formal notice to all listed beneficiaries. Due to newly submitted documentation and a pending dispute of legality, all disbursements from the family trust would be temporarily suspended. Property titles would be reevaluated. Financial history from the last 2 years would be under independent audit. And if any party was found to have acted in breach of fiduciary duty, legal proceedings would follow. I didn't need to see their reactions to know what happened next. Rachel, likely pacing the kitchen in her silk robe, furiously refreshing her email as Greg asked questions she didn't want to answer. My mother, calling every old friend with legal ties, spinning her own version of events. Anna's always had issues, emotional instability, estranged. This is just more of the same. Dylan, realizing he might have to answer for how he acquired a property at half its value with forged consent forms. But the truth was out. I had exposed it without screaming, without groveling, without coming back into their lives begging to be seen. I had done it on paper, with evidence, with quiet, razor-sharp precision. The kind of revenge that doesn't burn bridges, it rebuilds them just long enough to lead your enemies to the edge, then vanishes beneath their feet. And I wasn't done. That afternoon, I met with a journalist. Local, independent, someone Grandma once donated to when their paper was nearly bankrupt. I showed her the entire file. Not just the legal pieces, but the story, the personal side. The timeline of how Rachel had manipulated a dying woman. How the family smeared me while covering up financial misconduct. I didn't ask her to publish. I just asked her to know. She read in silence. Her face didn't move much. Then she said, "You sure you want to disappear after all this?" I nodded. That's the only reason I could do it. Some people destroy their abusers publicly for the world to see. I was not one of those people. I didn't need applause. I didn't need pity. I just needed to know they couldn't do it again, that no one else would be tricked by their smiles and charm and matching Christmas pajamas. By Friday, the call started. First my mother, then Rachel, then Dylan. Voicemails at first, then emails, then texts disguised as peace offerings. Mom thinks we've all made mistakes. Maybe we can talk this through. Rachel, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is going to hurt everyone, including you. Dylan, you got what you wanted. You embarrassed us. Can we move on now? It was almost laughable. They still thought this was about embarrassment, as if my goal had been humiliation, as if I was still small enough to care what they thought of me. But what they didn't realize, what they never understood, was that I didn't want back in. I wasn't doing this to repair anything. I had already grieved this family years ago, cried in an empty apartment on birthdays, listened to voicemail greetings instead of voices, worn hand-me-downs to job interviews while they paid for ski trips with grandma's money. I had buried them long before this wedding. This wasn't revenge. It was burial. One they couldn't get up from. Late that night, I opened my email and found one last message that made me stop breathing for a second. From Dad, I told the auditors the truth about the vote, about the trust, about the house. I didn't protect you when it mattered. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm not letting them lie anymore. I stared at it for a long time, because that was the moment I realized something strange. I wasn't angry at him anymore. Not in the way that I had been. Not with the heat and ache and betrayal. It had all hardened into something colder, quieter. A boundary, not a wound. He wasn't a hero, but he was no longer a coward either. And for the first time, someone in that family stood beside me. Not behind me, not on a stage, but beside me. That didn't change the ending, but it softened the silence around it. I shut the laptop, turned off the lamp, and lay down with the hum of cicadas in my ears. I had one more day in this state before disappearing for good. I'd already lined up a lease in Montana, somewhere small, anonymous, beautiful. No forwarding address, no Facebook, no holiday cards, just space. And maybe, someday, peace. But not yet, because on Saturday morning, Rachel went live on Instagram. A full face of makeup, tear-streaked mascara, sobbing in her walk-in closet about betrayal, family, and a twisted campaign to ruin her reputation. She even wore white. She spoke like she was auditioning for sympathy while avoiding every detail that mattered. She said I was unstable, that I was always jealous, that I twisted our grandmother's memory. I watched it once, silently. No reaction, just one long stare at a woman unraveling on camera, not because she was grieving, but because she couldn't control the story anymore. It had slipped out of her hands the moment I stopped speaking. And now it was too late. The live stream spread like mold, quietly at first, then suffocating everything it touched. By Monday morning, it had been clipped, reposted, and dissected on half a dozen Reddit threads. One thread was titled, "Local Influencer Breaks Down After Inheritance Lawsuit, but is she leaving something out?" Comments poured in, many defending her, many not. But the ones that hit hardest were the neutral ones, the clinical ones, the strangers who dissected our family like an autopsy. If she drained a trust fund, that's not just family drama, that's theft. Funny how she never mentioned why the trust is frozen. Don't feel sorry for rich girls crying in closets with ring lights. She couldn't control the narrative anymore, and for someone like Rachel, that was worse than losing money, worse than losing the wedding photos she now refused to post, worse even than the news that came next. Because on Wednesday, the second audit was confirmed. The property transfer, Grandma's house, was involved. Turns out, Dylan never got proper sign-off from the estate. The documents were forged, and with my father now openly admitting he never signed, the county initiated a fraud investigation. Dylan was advised to lawyer up. He didn't take it well. He called me that night, 3 times. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail after the second attempt, his voice cracking. "You don't have to do this. I didn't know everything. I just did what your mom said. Please, Anna, please." I listened to the message once, then deleted it. Not because I didn't care, because I cared for too long. Because forgiveness doesn't mean return, and mercy isn't owed just because someone cries when the consequences show up. And there was more. Emails surfaced, screenshots from a former assistant Rachel had fired last year for attitude. This woman, God bless her memory stick, had saved everything, including invoices, including wire transfers, including a full breakdown of how Rachel used $87,000 from the trust to pay for vendors, makeup trials, custom lighting, and a private post-wedding getaway to St. Bart's. The assistant released them anonymously, of course, but it wasn't hard to connect the dots. Suddenly, Rachel wasn't just a bride crying in a closet. She was a fraudster under fire. And when the reporters started sniffing around the family's long-standing philanthropic image, my mother, naturally, blamed me. She sent an email. "This is character assassination. You're ruining everything. I raised you better than this." I replied with a single sentence. "No, you raised me to stay silent." She never responded. Instead, she called my father, screamed at him, said he was taking my side, said he was throwing everything away for a thankless child who left us. But I know what really scared her. He wasn't defending me. He was just telling the truth. And in our family, the truth was always the most dangerous act of all. That week, everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. Lawyers sent emails at dawn. Reporters called the family home. The event venue filed a lien for unpaid services. Rachel pulled her brand partnerships offline. Greg moved into a hotel for space. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even relieved. I was just done. Done with them. Done with waiting for apologies. Done pretending I could ever explain myself to people who were only listening for the parts they could twist. Done hoping that blood meant anything when every cut had come from their hands. On Friday, I stood at the edge of a gravel road in Montana. The air was thinner there, cleaner, colder. My new address was little more than a cottage on a ridge, 2 rooms, 1 key, and no past. The landlord was a widow who didn't ask questions. She just handed me the lease and offered a slice of blueberry pie. The silence there was different, not the kind I used to drown in back home. This one had space in it. Air, mercy. I could hear my own breathing. That night, I lit a fire and sat outside with a blanket and the stars. I thought of Grandma, her perfume, her laugh, the way she used to trace her fingers through my hair when I was little and said I had a wild soul no one could keep. She would have understood this, maybe even smiled at it. Not the vengeance, but the closure, the letting go. I thought of Rachel, probably scrubbing her social media by now, of Dylan, sitting in the house he might soon lose, of my mother, rehearsing lines to defend herself from reporters, of Greg Googling annulment laws in his hotel room. And I thought of myself, tired, unmade, finally uninvited. That was always the dream, wasn't it? To be the one who chose to leave. Not out of spite, but out of survival. The ruling came 2 weeks later. I hadn't expected it to be that fast. Keating had warned me. Courts move slow when it comes to money, slower when it involves family. But this wasn't a normal case. It wasn't just about money. It was about fraud, signatures, deception. It was about a family that had treated a dead woman's wishes like an obstacle course they could cheat through. So, when the judge ordered the full reinstatement of the original trust structure, with me named as co-trustee, and nullified the house transfer, I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, alone in that cold cottage kitchen, rereading the ruling 3 times. It was done. They could appeal, of course, try to drag it out, but the facts were facts. My name was back on the documents. The estate was frozen from further withdrawal. The house? Dylan now owed penalties for attempted fraudulent acquisition. And Rachel? She was facing separate civil action for breach of fiduciary responsibility. Greg filed for divorce that Monday. Turns out, lying about personal finances and hiding frozen assets didn't sit well with his legal team, especially not when his parents had quietly asked for a prenup she never signed. My mother didn't speak to the press, but she didn't have to. Her silence became a story on its own. Old acquaintances came out of the woodwork, people she hadn't spoken to in years, some with stories of their own, small betrayals, casual cruelties, patterns she thought no one noticed. The truth always waits, quietly, until it doesn't. And me? I stayed quiet. I didn't give interviews, didn't post a single word on social media. I let them eat each other alive in the spotlight they used to weaponize. Let them craft press releases while drowning in debt. Let them finally experience the thing they'd done to me for years, being erased. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. There was one last thing I needed to do. I flew back to the city, just for the day, wore a scarf and sunglasses, walked up the courthouse steps with my shoulders back and my name clean. I had an appointment, not with a judge, with the estate manager who'd mishandled the original documentation, the man who swore he had never seen my name on the trust paperwork, the same man who processed Rachel's withdrawal request without verifying anything. I walked into his office. He looked older than I remembered, more nervous. "Miss Kepler," he said, "I didn't expect." "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for a correction." He nodded. "We filed the restitution paperwork. The adjusted balance is now visible in your portal." That's not what I mean." He looked up. "I want Grandma's name restored on the property, as sole originator, on public record. I want a plaque installed on the front gate stating this was her home, her legacy." He swallowed. "That can be done." "And one more thing," I added. "I want the record to show she intended equal inheritance, that any changes made in the final year were contested and deemed externally influenced." "That might require—" "Then do what it takes." He blinked at me, then nodded. Outside, the air was heavy. The courthouse square was bustling. Lawyers, interns, people fighting for things that used to matter. I stood in the center of it all, and didn't feel small. Not anymore. That night back in Montana, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my father. No return address, just his name, his writing. Inside, Anna, I've sold my shares. All of them. I've submitted my statement to the court, and I've attached my personal affidavit regarding Rachel's manipulation of our mother's will. I know this doesn't fix what I didn't do before, but if your grandmother saw even a fraction of the woman you've become, she'd be proud. I hope someday, if you ever want to talk, you'll know I'll be there. No judgment, no excuses. Just there. Dad. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't call him. But I didn't throw it away either. I folded it neatly, slid it into the wooden box that held the few things I hadn't let this family poison: a photo of Grandma holding my hand in the garden, a birthday card before things fell apart, the key to the original front door of the house they tried to erase me from. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something uncoil. Not trust, not reconciliation, but relief. Rachel's public image was crumbling. Dylan was trying to sell off cars to cover legal fees. My mother had disappeared from public life, retreating to focus on her health, according to one bland statement. And me? I wasn't just alive. I was free. It was almost autumn when he showed up. I was chopping wood behind the cottage, sweat clinging to my back, the kind of simple physical work that made you feel like the earth still had a use for you. The trees had just begun to turn, flashes of red at the tips, that first warning in the leaves that the year was about to fold into itself. I heard tires on gravel, a sound that didn't belong out here. No one ever came this far up the ridge unless they were lost or stubborn. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked to the front, axe still in my grip, boots heavy in the dirt. The car was old, not rented, not new, just familiar. He stepped out slowly, cautiously, like the land itself might reject him. My father. "Hi," he said. His voice hadn't changed. That same low calm, always a little too late to stop anything. I didn't speak, just stood there, waiting. "I didn't come to talk you into anything," he said, after a beat. "I just wanted to see where you are." He looked around, taking in the hills, the sky, the smoke curling from the chimney. "I get it now," he said quietly, "why you left, why you never wanted to come back." Still, I said nothing. He added, "I'm not staying. I know you didn't invite me. I just needed to see that you were okay." I nodded finally, not because I agreed, but because it was the closest thing to understanding I could offer. He reached into his coat and handed me a small envelope. He said, "I found something in Mom's sewing cabinet. I think she meant for you to have it." Then he turned back to the car, not waiting for approval, not asking to be let inside, just a man who'd finally chosen truth, however late it arrived. He drove away before I opened it. I stood on the porch steps for a long time, the envelope trembling in my hands. It was old, yellowing, her handwriting on the front. "For Anna, when they forget who you are." Inside was a single sheet of stationery and a pressed wildflower, dried but intact. The note read, "You see more than they do. That will always scare them. Stay soft, even when they try to harden you. You were never wrong to speak. You were never wrong to go. My garden is yours now. Grandma." I sat down on the steps and let the weight of it fall through me. That garden, the one they tore out, The roses they flattened for a modern walkway, the lavender patch they dug up to make room for patio furniture. She had meant it for me. Not the house, not the money, the roots, the history, the quiet place where things grew. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. For a long time, I stayed there, just breathing, listening to the wind run its fingers through the trees. No crying, no dramatic music, just stillness, a kind of grief that wasn't pain anymore, just truth. That night, I lit the fireplace and pulled out the last piece of the plan, a packet I'd prepared in case I ever wanted to finish it all. Not the revenge, not the exposure, but the closure. Inside were 3 signed transfer forms, 1/3 of the trust fund to be allocated for charity under Grandma's name, specifically for girls' education and housing support for young women aging out of the foster system, just like Grandma would have wanted. The other 2/3 would remain split between me and a scholarship foundation I'd quietly started, one that required no essays, no GPA, just a personal story and a dream. It was never about keeping the money. It was about keeping it from them. From the people who weaponized inheritance, who treated legacy like a popularity contest, who thought power was about control, not protection. I sent the documents off the next morning. Let them learn about it the way I learned about the house sale, through records, cold, impersonal, undeniable. In the following weeks, I heard nothing from my mother. No call, no email, just silence. But from Rachel, one more message came through. Not a threat, not even an apology, just one sentence. You always hated how you never needed anyone. I didn't reply, because that was the difference between us. She wanted to be needed. I wanted to be free. The letter came from a name I didn't recognize. Typed, not handwritten. No family crest, no sentimental phrasing, just a plain white envelope forwarded to my Montana P.O. box with the stamp of a New York law office in the corner. Inside was a formal notice. Rachel was suing me. The grounds: emotional distress, reputational damage, and defamation resulting in quantifiable financial loss. I laughed. Not the bitter kind of laugh I used to choke on when they twisted reality, but a real one. Quiet, exhausted, almost amused. Of course she would try to rewrite the ending. Of course she'd make herself the victim again. Because for people like Rachel, the truth isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. The suit had no legs. That much was clear. The documentation I'd submitted was airtight, the judgment final. But she filed anyway. Maybe out of desperation, maybe out of habit, maybe because her world was shrinking and she didn't know how to live without control. Keating called me the next day. "You don't need to worry," he said calmly. "This is noise. She's bleeding influence and trying to create chaos. It won't go anywhere." "I'm not worried," I replied calmly. "I just want it on record. Let them see how far she'll go." Still, the weight of it lingered. It was like a cold hand on the back of my neck, reminding me that even in defeat, people like her will scratch and claw and smear until the room clears or the lights go out. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about dragging me back into the drama, making me play the villain one more time. But I'd already stepped off that stage. I let the legal team handle everything. I didn't post about it, didn't warn friends, didn't counterattack. I planted more trees, a row of young pines along the eastern edge of the cottage. The soil was hard that morning. My palms blistered. But it was good pain, real pain. Not the kind my family left behind like invisible bruises. This was honest labor, and when the work was done, the land looked stronger, anchored. 3 weeks passed. The lawsuit was dismissed. Rachel didn't appeal. Instead, she went quiet, deleted social accounts. Her name, once tied to sponsored content and influencer retreats, became a cautionary tale in marketing forums and gossip blogs. The wedding that ended an empire. She never recovered. Greg remarried the following year to someone his mother picked. Dylan filed for bankruptcy. The house was sold again, this time to an elderly couple who planted vegetables where the pool had been. My mother retreated into gated communities and exclusive luncheons, trying to pretend her daughter had never existed. But people remembered. You can't erase truth. Not forever. And me? I kept building. I expanded the scholarship fund, oversaw the planting of Grandma's garden, lavender, rose, sage, sunflower, just like she used to grow. I got chickens. I taught a local writing class. I built a life from the things they told me were too small to matter. And then, one day, years later, I got another letter. This one was different. Short, written in shaky script. It was from a girl in Ohio. Dear Anna, I got the grant. I cried when I read the letter. I didn't think anyone would ever believe in me again. Not after everything. I just wanted you to know. You changed my life. Thank you, Maya. I read it twice, then again. Then I folded it slowly and placed it in the same box where I kept Grandma's note, my father's apology, and the original trust documents. For a long time, I sat in the chair by the window, hands resting on the wood like they'd been built for stillness. That was it, wasn't it? That was the full circle. Not revenge, not vindication, just the quiet power of choosing to become more than what they left you with. The first snow came early that year. It wasn't much, just a dusting, really. A quiet film across the treetops and the earth, softening everything into stillness. I stood at the edge of the ridge, boots sinking slightly into the crusted soil, watching the mountains breathe beneath a silver sky. Somewhere in the distance, a fox moved like a flicker of rust across the white. My hands were wrapped around a chipped mug, steam curling upward. I'd learned to appreciate mornings like this. Empty, clean, the kind that offered no noise except what the wind whispered through the pine. The kind that didn't expect anything from me. There had been a time when silence terrified me, when the absence of chaos felt like failure, a void I needed to fill with proving, with defending, with earning love from people who had none to give. But not anymore. The cottage had changed since I arrived. So had I. The walls were lined with books now. The shelves held jars of herbs I'd grown myself. A stack of folded letters sat beside the fireplace. Thank you notes from girls I'd never met who had written to say the scholarship changed their lives. Some were starting businesses. Some had gone back to school. Some just needed enough to get out of dangerous homes. Every one of them, in some quiet way, had been me once. I didn't reply to most of the letters, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted them to keep going forward, not back. I wanted them to know they weren't alone, but they didn't owe anyone their pain, especially not me. Closure doesn't always need to be a conversation. Sometimes it's a gate that swings shut behind you and doesn't creak again. One morning, in the middle of December, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a small wooden box. and a folded note written in familiar handwriting. She would have wanted you to have it. Dad. Inside the box was Grandma's locket. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. Gold, worn, etched with vines. She used to wear it every Sunday, tucked just beneath her collarbone like a secret heartbeat. It didn't have photos inside, just a pressed sprig of rosemary and a folded scrap of paper with a quote in her handwriting. Survive first, then build, then teach others to do the same. I closed the locket gently and placed it on the windowsill where the morning sun would catch it each day. That was her legacy. Not the house, not the trust, not the messy, crumbling family name, but the quiet revolution she planted in me, the refusal to be erased. Some nights I dream of the past, not nightmares, just fragments. The sound of Rachel's voice calling from across the hall, the way my mother poured tea like every movement was a performance, the garden hose curled like a sleeping snake beside the porch. I wake up with the scent of roses still on my breath, but I never wake up wanting to go back. They never saw me. Not really. They saw what they needed: a scapegoat, a shadow, a reminder of everything they didn't want to face in themselves. They kept trying to paint me as broken because it made them feel whole. But the truth is, I wasn't broken. I was just misread. And in the quiet of this life I built with my own two hands, far from their cameras and Christmas cards and crocodile tears, I finally understood something simple. I never needed them to believe me. I just needed to stop needing them. And now, I don't even think of them as family. Family, I've learned, isn't who you share blood with. It's who roots for your voice to rise, who protects the part of you that can't be replaced, who shows up not to edit your story, but to help you write it. And the story I've written, it begins with a girl no one thought would leave, and ends with a woman no one can silence again.